Hello Herstoryans, and welcome to another episode of A Historian Reacts. Today we are going to be talking about Medici Season 3, which came out on Netflix, I believe, on the 1st of May, so beginning of this month. I apologise first of all for the poor lighting. It's an absolutely beautiful day here in the UK and the sun is beaming through the windows, so I've had to pull the curtain across so I'm not completely blinded. Normally I sit by the window and do my videos, but today that's just not possible. So I'm doing a bit of a different approach this time around. Normally I will just watch a series and I will kind of note things down and I will sort of list the historical inaccuracies or the main plot points and the things that did happen and whether they're true or not. This time I decided to address it chronologically, so we're going to go episode by episode and talk about what happens in each episode and whether it happened or not. So let me know if you like the new format or if you'd like me to go back to the old format when you've finished this video. So yes, without further ado, let's crack on. Medici Season 3. So the main protagonists, we have Lorenzo de' Medici, played by Daniel Sharman. We have Clarice Orsini, played by Synnøve Carlson. I'm really sorry I pronounced Synnøve wrong in my last video. I've now got a pronunciation app on my phone so I can look up how things are pronounced. So hopefully I won't offend as many people next time. We have Piero, played by Louis Partridge. And they are the sort of main protagonists of our story. The first thing I want to address is why was it called Medici Part 2 when it's the third season. So we had Series 1 Medici Masters of Florence, Series 2 Medici the Magnificent, and Series 3, its Italian title is Nel nome della famiglia, which is in the name of the family, which I thought was an amazing title. So it was supposed to be Season 3 in the name of the family, but for some reason it's Medici Part 2, even though it's Series 3. So that kind of confused me a little bit, but I get it, it's Part 2 of Magnificent, but I would have gone with it in the name of the family. Let me know what you think in the comments below, but I would have gone with it in the name of the family. Oh, also let me know in the comments below what Hogwarts house you are. Obviously I'm a Ravenclaw. So yes, here we go. Let's have a look at this chronologically. So episode 1, Survival. We begin in 1478, I assume just a few months after the Patsy conspiracy, and we're introduced to Giulio, Giovanni's illegitimate son by a woman called Fioretta, full name Giulio di Giuliano de' Medici. He was actually born on the 26th of May 1478, 1 month after Giuliano's death, so would have been a tiny baby at the time in the series and not the 6 or 7 year old as he's sort of portrayed to be. His mother is thought to have been Fioretta Guarini, but we don't actually know. She was the daughter of a university professor. Giulio spent the first 7 years of his life with his godfather, the architect Antonio da Sangallo the elder, before joining the Medici household. Lorenzo did raise him as his own. And then we move over to Botticelli, and Botticelli is painting the hanging Patsies on the wall of the Palazzo del Podesta, or the Bargello. This did happen. There was a common style of painting called the Pittura de Infamia, which is a painting of infamy, sort of like a wanted poster of the time, and they would commission artists to paint these sorts of things. and those who'd committed treason were painted hanging by a heel with a free leg dangling, but it wasn't sort of done in the main piazza. They were mostly done on the walls of people's houses and stuff like that. And we notice in the series that space is left for Riario, who is Pope Sixtus IV's nephew and his general of the church. And this is true. Riario was a real person, and Sixtus was reigning at this time as Pope. So the Pope did react badly to the aftermath of the Pazzi Rebellion, particularly the execution of the Archbishop of Pisa, Archbishop Salviati, in retribution, and he did excommunicate Lorenzo as a result of this. There's no evidence the Pope was ever after Giulio or even knew of his existence. Savonarola, who I think at this point is a friar, makes his entrance, and it seems that him and Lorenzo will get along really well, and they've got kind of similar ideologies. Spoiler alert. I should say, if you haven't already gathered by now, this is going to be heavily spoiler-based video, so please go and watch the series before you come here. Self-explanatory, but yeah. So then we have Lorenzo's uncle Carlo, who is for some reason imprisoned by Pope Sixtus, and he was never held prisoner by the Pope. Actually, very, very little is known about Carlo's life, and there was also no evidence of an assassination attempt against him that I could find. And I did a deep dive. This, I have to say, is the most researched video I have ever made on this channel so far. I had to dig back very, very far. I had to look into letters that Polita had written to Lorenzo, and I had to dig very deep to get some of the answers to the questions that I had about this episode. So I'm not claiming to be 100% right, but this episode is very thoroughly researched. So if you know any sources or any evidence to the contrary, please let me know. I'd be really interested in seeing them. Anyway, so Carlo is being held prisoner by the Pope, even though he wasn't. Cardinal Raffaele Riario was held captive by the Medici, and he was released because he was found to have had nothing to do with the conspiracy. So there was no trade. There was no exchange of hostages, if you like. There's no evidence that Botticelli tutored the Medici children, though you'll be pleased to know if you watch my last video, I had the hump because Fortitude, the painting Fortitude by Botticelli, was hanging up in the Medici kitchen, and I was like, no, it wouldn't have been painted by then. Fortitude has now been painted, so it's fine to be sitting in the Medici kitchen. You'll be pleased to know. Then we're on to episode 2, the 10. So this is several months into war. War was declared in 1479. Okay, you're going to notice as we go through, this timeline is all over the damn place. But I'll try and make it make sense. My first thought is, where is Da Vinci and his war machines? We stan Da Vinci in this house. Absolutely. Stan Leonardo da Vinci in this house. We're introduced to Leonardo da Vinci later, and we're introduced to the war machines in Milan a bit later, but not enough is made of this, in my opinion. Da Vinci's war machines can literally turn the tide of a battle. And if you want to see that in more detail, please go and watch Da Vinci's Demons. Clarice is pregnant with Maddalena. The King of England, Edward IV, did default on his loan, placing the Medici in a precarious financial situation. But he wasn't the only reason. The Duke of Milan was also in serious debt to them, and banking in general was kind of declining. at this time. So the banking families are coming to rely on marriage alliances and placing sons into the clergy and other ways to survive, which is shown in the series. Clarice is seen handing out alms at the convent of St. Marco. She was a generous patron of the convents of St. She was a generous patron of the convents of St. Marco and Santa Lucia, according to Natalie R. Thomas. However, I couldn't find any sources to suggest she physically handed out alms or she physically tended to wounded soldiers, but she might have done. Clarice and the kids are sent to Pistoia for their own safety. This did happen during the Patsy conspiracy, but I can't find any evidence that this happened afterwards. And my first thought was, why is Clarice travelling? She should be lying in because she's heavily pregnant. Sorry, the sun has decided to move and it's attacking me slightly, but we persevere and we'll carry on. So, certainly, Maddalena's birthplace is stated as being in Florence, not Pistoia or Tuscany. And she was born in 1473, 5 years before the Patsy conspiracy. Her real name is also Maria Maddalena Romola de' Medici. Maddalena is her middle name, but she did go by the name Maddalena. Daughter Contessina, interestingly, was born in 1478 in Pistoia. So they could have just had Contessina be born in the series. I don't know. Anyway. So I could not find any evidence of an assassination attempt on the family in Pistoia, or that Clarice met Bianca in secret. By all accounts, Lorenzo and Bianca remained quite close despite the Patsy conspiracy. Her marriage to Guillermo Patsy was brokered by Lorenzo pre the conspiracy to try and heal the rift between the two families, and the marriage to Bianca actually saved Guillermo from execution. I have to do something about this light. I'm terribly sorry. There we go. So, yes, the marriage to Bianca saved Guillermo Patsy from execution. He was put under house arrest for a short while, and their daughters were exempted from the marriage ban imposed upon the other Patsy daughters. So Lorenzo and Bianca stayed fairly close. He'd arranged the marriage, so it wasn't her fault. They didn't run off together. I need to stop gesticulating so much because I'm wobbling the camera. That's how I talk. I'm Italian. I can't help it. So Clarice did have very strong feelings on how her children should be educated, and she was very pious and traditional, so she would have pushed for the study of the Bible and religious doctrine. That is true. I struggled to find any information about Lorenzo's resignation from the Signoria and the appointment of a war council of 10 men. So jury's out on that one. I find it strange that they would put something so significant in there without there being information to back that up. I just couldn't find it. I looked into the history of the Republic of Florence and the government of Florence. I couldn't find it. I looked into the history of Lorenzo. I couldn't find it. But that's not to say it's not out there. Sad news, everybody. Bruno Bernardi did not exist. Sad times. I know. So now we're on to episode 3, Trust. Lorenzo goes to Naples to try and get King Ferrante, or Ferdinand I is his real name, to stop supporting the Pope in the war. This did happen. Lorenzo was received as an honoured guest and he spent 3 months there, charming the absolute socks off King Ferrante, which worked a treat, and Lorenzo returned to Florence with peace. Now, Florence was expecting a horrific defeat, so Lorenzo coming back with this turn of events and bringing peace made him seem quite magnificent in the eyes of the Florentine people. The Turks did invade at Otranto in 1480, rather conveniently. Some say Lorenzo put them up to it, but that's unlikely. It was probably just pure coincidence. Found no evidence whatsoever of Ferrante attempting to ransom Lorenzo at all. One question I asked was, would Lucretia have been in charge of the bank in Lorenzo's absence? And the answer seems to be a resounding yes. The women were highly educated and they were trusting with running the show while their sons and husbands and menfolk were away. And then we get onto the character of Ippolita Maria Sforza, Ferrante's daughter-in-law, who's married to his son Alfonso, the Duke of Calabria. According to Judith Bryce, Lorenzo and Ippolita did at least know each other well enough to write to one another, and I did do some deep diving into the letters between the two of them. Ippolita was tall, slim and blonde and famously very learned. Her brother Galeazzo was Duke of Milan. In a letter of the 7th of April 1483, she addresses Lorenzo as my dear brother and wrote that the two friends shared all things in common. They seem to have met in Milan in 1465 when Lorenzo represented his family as a guest at her wedding, and about a month later she passes through Florence and is received as a guest by the Medici family. She was entrusted with the role of mediator when Lorenzo was in Naples, but I found no evidence of any intimacy between them in their letters, and that I was able to gain access to. There was one set of letters on JSTOR that my Open University login wouldn't let me access. And it quite intriguingly said that if the contents of those letters were made public, it would have been a scandal for Ippolita. So I'm very interested if anyone's got a JSTOR login that they can access that. Please do let me know, because I couldn't get it with my Open University login. It's called Between Friends by Judith Bryce, and it's a journal article in Renaissance Studies from 2007. So go and have a look at that and get back to me. So then we cut to Clarice and Lucretia Dies having a conversation. My question was, would they have met? Would Clarice have had the hump with her? They very likely would have met, because they were two very prominent Florentine women. And Lorenzo and Lucretia's relationship was strictly platonic. Lorenzo fancied the pants of Lucretia Dies, but it was not reciprocated, so I don't think Clarice would have had much of a problem with her. I mean, maybe she was jealous that her husband fancied this person, but no, I don't think it would have been a massive drama. Then we're on to episode 4, Innocent, halfway through. So this is 7 years later. So if we're going by 1479 when the war broke out, this has to be at least 1486 by the series timeline. Maddalena is 7, so it's hard to pinpoint exactly what's going on in their timeline there, because they show Maddalena as being born in 1479 instead of 1473. So I'm confused. Are you confused? I'm confused. Clarice did take over from Lucretia with her banking duties. I find it very hard to believe that Lucretia had stashed a load of money away from public coffers without Lorenzo's knowledge, but I guess it's possible. So Riario and Sixtus are on the rampage in Ferrara, and holding Salt hostage would have been a very plausible tactic, I think. The peace conference, or the Treaty of Bagnolo, was concluded in 1484, even though we're at least 1486 by the series timeline. It's about to get mad up in here. The timelines are about to do this. Ooh. So yes, concluded in 1484. It did not include Pope Sixtus. Sixtus died the day after receiving the news of the peace treaty being signed, supposedly unable to face happily the prospect of life without war. and he died on the 12th of August 1484. Lucretia Dies. She actually died on the 25th of March 1482, aged 54, in Florence. Her cause of death is unknown, but it is known that she suffered with arthritis terribly badly later in life. Giovanni and Giulio go off to the Courier in Rome. In fact, only Giovanni went. Giulio, although he famously becomes Pope Clement VII later in life, was, while Lorenzo was alive at least, was enrolled in the Knights of Rhodes and was Grand Prior of Capua during Lorenzo's lifetime. He joins the church in 1492 after Lorenzo died, and he became a cardinal in 1513 when Giovanni became Pope Leo X. Once again, we see the completed Ponte Vecchio with Vasari corridor in the background as Giulio throws his sword in the River Arno. The Vasari corridor was not completed until 1565. Episode 5, the Holy See. So Clarice and Lorenzo are in Rome, and they're trying to get their desired person made Pope. That's the premise of this episode. Clarice looks pregnant again, and Savonarola is starting to cause trouble. It's going to get a whole lot worse. So in Rome, we meet Katarina Schwarzeriara, a woman who deserves a series all to herself, and you best believe I'm going to do a Herstory episode on her, because she is that bitch. She was married to Riario at the age of 10, and they had 6 children, 5 sons and 1 daughter, who are missing from the series. Riario was assassinated on the 14th of April, 1488. Again, the timeline, it's all over the place. By members of the Orsi family. Cecco and Ludovico Orsi entered the palace and attacked Riario with swords, with guards just merrily watching. A total of 9 assassins slashed Riario to death over a financial dispute, and after more than half a dozen previous attempts as well. They tossed his corpse into the piazza to cheers from the crowd gathered there. Katerina and her children were taken prisoner. The Medici, though no doubt absolutely elated that someone had done away with Riario, gave their support to Katerina and her kids over the Orsi, and the brothers were forced to flee. After Riario's assassination, Katerina rules Imola as regent in her son Ottaviano's place. Her and Clarice probably did meet at some point, but Katerina likely had no part in the assassination of her husband. He had plenty of enemies. Pope Innocent VIII is now head of the Church of Rome, Giovanni Battista Cibo, and he was elected in 1484, 4 years before Riario is killed. The timeline, I can't take it. Episode 6, A Man of No Importance. We see Lucretia Dies, Botticelli, and even Clarice listening to Savonarola's increasingly radical speeches. They probably would have heard his speeches. Whether they were following them, I don't know. I don't have a great deal to say about this episode, so let's dig into Savonarola a little bit. So, Girolamo Savonarola came from Ferrara and arrived in Florence at the convent of St. Marco in 1482 as a teacher, lecturer, whatever. He had a revelation about the church's corruption, wandered northern towns and cities preaching before returning to San Marco again in 1490, so right towards the end of Lorenzo's life. Lorenzo and he did get along at this time. Lorenzo was partly the reason why he returned to Florence. Lorenzo kind of petitioned to have him brought back and greased some palms for that to happen. He didn't start preaching against tyranny until 1492, the year Lorenzo died, and he didn't cause real problems until later on, and we'll come back to his story when we round up at the end, because he causes a lot of trouble after Lorenzo's death. Bruno Bernardi. who we know is a fictional character, reveals his identity as Bruno Battista from Sarzana. I can't find any evidence of Battistas in Sarzana until 1694. It seems that the city of Sarzana belonged to the Republic of Genoa until the Medicis took it in 1487, destroying the Fermo Fede fortress before control of the area returned to Genoa. I can't find any evidence of a Guido or a Bruno Battista existing in Sarzana. And then, of course, we have Tommaso Peruzzi, who discovers the missing city funds and goes splat out of the window before he can reveal what the Medici have done with the dowry funds. The Peruzzi were another prominent banking family, but they collapsed in 1345 and went bankrupt. There was a man called Baldassare Tommaso Peruzzi, who was an architect and a painter, but he wasn't born until 1481 near Siena, and he died in Rome in 1536. So I think Tommaso is a completely fictional character. Episode 7, Lost Souls. Lorenzo is having a very hard time health-wise by this point. He did suffer with gout terribly, or bad blood, as he calls it, inherited from his father, aptly named Piero the Gouty. Michelangelo makes an appearance as a young man. He did study in Lorenzo's gardens and did sculpt the bust of a form, with Lorenzo watching his progress, even down to making the suggestion about the teeth, according to Anne Manning's History of Italy. Clarice appears pregnant again, but they did have 10 children, and 6 survived to adulthood, so it's plausible. Clarice seems sort of kind of pregnant sort of constantly throughout the whole series. There was lots of kind of touching of bellies and stuff like that. So there we go. So their firstborn child was actually a girl called Lucretia, who doesn't appear in the series at all. Then comes Piero, then Maddalena, then Giovanni, then Contessina, and then Giuliano. Sorry, the postman's been. That's why the dogs are going off. So Giuliano was the last child born in 1479. So this is when the war broke out, right? So Clarice is most definitely not pregnant this far into the series, which is supposed to be well into the 1480s by this point. Savonarola's men commit an arson attack on the Medici palace. The only record I can find of a fire in any of the Medici palaces was at the Palazzo Pitti in 1984. In his scheme to make Giovanni a cardinal, a marriage is proposed between daughter Maddalena and the Pope's nephew Francischetto. This marriage did go ahead. Clarice would have known all about it, and she actually attended the wedding in Rome in 1487. We need to remember that marriage alliances like this were absolutely par for the course at the time. After hearing one of Savonarola's sermons, Clarice seems to suffer a miscarriage and dies. We don't know if the miscarriage happened or not. It's certainly plausible. Clarice was of childbearing age when she died. Clarice dies in Florence on the 30th of July, 1488, only 3 months after Riario, after years of suffering from tuberculosis, and she was aged 35. Lorenzo was not in Florence when she died, so he never got to say goodbye. He was in Siena being treated for his gout. He also didn't make it to her funeral, which was held 2 days later. In a letter to Pope Innocent VIII, he wrote, "The death of my dearest and sweetest wife, Clarice, is of so much damage, prejudice, and pain for infinite reasons, and this, to be deprived of such sweet habits and companionship, currently makes me feel as if I am lost." They did love each other. Episode 8, The Fate of the City, and this is the final episode of the series. Lorenzo and Piero seem to drift further apart as Lorenzo contemplates having Savonarola assassinated. Piero and Savonarola did get along well, to begin with. I can find no evidence of this assassination attempt or Lorenzo saving him. There were many attempts on Savonarola's life. He was not a popular guy, including one attempt where someone tried to blow up his pulpit. But these are all after Lorenzo dies. Bianca likely was around, and in the last years of his life, the family bank did start to collapse, and Lorenzo did resort to misappropriating trust and state funds, but this wasn't discovered until after his death. So no sort of Tommaso uncovering it kind of thing. I can't find any evidence of vandalism or looting of the Medici palaces and gardens while Lorenzo's still alive. Lorenzo died on the evening of the 4th of April 1492, aged 45, at Courier. His gout had caused an infection in his leg, which turned gangrenous. Savonarola did read his last rites, and it was all rather cordial and peaceful. I absolutely loved the line, "What happened here in Florence, it cannot be erased," because it certainly hasn't. It's a great thanks to the last Medici woman, who I want to say was called Anna Louisa. So sorry if that's wrong. But anyway, the last Medici female who had no heir entrusted all of the artwork, the architecture, all of the Medici owned buildings to the city of Florence, with the proviso that they should always be accessible to the people. So that is why Florence is the beautiful city it is today, because of her. We see bonfires where art and literature are sent up in flames by Savonarola's crew. These burning of the vanities did happen under Savonarola, and the most famous one wasn't until 5 years later in 1497 though, but even the first one wasn't until 1495, with so much art and so much knowledge lost. It's horrible to think of, but this didn't happen until at least 3 years after Lorenzo's death. Finally, we have a beautiful montage at the end which shows the Medici's lasting legacies of Michelangelo's David, Donatello's David, Botticelli's Birth of Venus, and finally the Duomo with the city in the background. And I thought the ending was absolutely beautiful. So let's talk about what happened next for each of the family members, and then my final thoughts. After Lorenzo's death in 1492, France decides it wants Naples. The King of France has a dynastic claim on Naples. So they send an army, but they need to go through Florence to get to Naples. Piero, the unfortunate Lorenzo's son, gets on a horse and rides out to meet the king without the Signoria's knowledge or permission. By the way, he just goes. And he ends up ceding 7 fortresses to the King of France. So Florence is a little bit annoyed by that. It sets up a new constitution and it boots the Medici out of the city. Piero has no aptitude for banking at all or politics. His passions were football, horses, dressing lavishly, and showing off his splendid body and good looks. When the Medicis fled, the Signoria sent armed guards to the Via Larga palace, where to protect it against plundering mobs and arson, officials quickly drew up an inventory of contents, accused Lorenzo of stealing public money, and said the goods and properties should be put up for sale. Rings were even taken off the fingers of the Medici women before they were sent to Santa Lucia, including Piero's wife Alfonsina, who, by the way, was an absolute boss, and we will definitely do an episode on her. Don't know why she wasn't in the series. The Medici won't return to the city of Florence until 1512 through the efforts of son Giovanni, who is ordained as Pope Leo X in 1513. He immediately makes Giulio a cardinal, who will later go on to become Pope Clement VII. Their other son, Giuliano, now he's not in the series, but he existed. The youngest son, Giuliano, becomes Duke of Nemours in 1515. What happens to the girls? Daughter Maddalena did marry Franceschetto Cibo in 1487, and they had 7 children. Lucretia, the oldest daughter, who's not seen in the series, married Jacopo Salviati in 1586 and had 10 children, including 2 cardinals for sons. And 2 of her daughters would also provide her with another pope and a grand duke for grandchildren. Contessina married Piero Ridolfi in 1494, and they had 5 kids, including Cardinal Niccolo Ridolfi. Powerful family. Savonarola. Pope Innocent VIII is succeeded by Rodrigo Borgia on the 11th of April 1492 and becomes Pope Alexander VI. I highly recommend the series The Borgias. Not Borgia on Netflix, but The Borgias, made by the same people as The Tudors and Vikings. Take 5 Productions. Fantastic series, and we'll definitely do a historian reacts on that at some point, but the Borgias are a whole other story entirely. Anyway, this goes into a bit more about, that series goes into a bit more about what happens with Savonarola and the trouble he causes. So Savonarola absolutely hates Rodrigo Borgia as Pope, understandably, because of everything Savonarola stands for. So he keeps preaching about clerical corruption and tyrannical leaders, and he kept prophesying about a new ruler coming from the north to reform the church. So when the King of France, Charles VIII, invaded Italy and threatened Florence in September of 1494, the people bought into this prophecy of this person coming from the north to change everything. When the Medicis were expelled, and at Savonarola's urging, Florence established a popular republic, and he declared Florence as the new Jerusalem, instituting quite an extreme puritanical campaign. In 1495, when Florence refused to join Pope Alexander VI's Holy League against France, the Vatican summoned Savonarola to Rome. He refused to go, carried on preaching despite being banned at this point, and held his bonfires of the Vanities. The Pope excommunicated him in May 1497 and had him imprisoned, and on the 23rd of May 1498, church and civil authorities condemned Savonarola of heresy, hanged and burned him in the main piazza of Florence. So there we go, that's what happens to all the main players. So my final thoughts. The timeline's all over the damn place. You've got Lucretia dying in 1482 at the same time as Riario is being murdered in 1488. And then episodes later, when Lorenzo is so much older, you have Clarice dying, even though she only died 3 months after Riario. It's a very messy timeline. Madalena, they're having Madalena born at the point when Contessina is born. It's all very confusing, and they have messed with timelines a lot. But that's not to say I didn't enjoy the series. I did enjoy the series, and I had a lot of questions when I was watching it and writing it down. The thing I liked the most was I liked seeing the light and the dark in the character of Lorenzo. It seems that as he gets older and his health problems give him more jip, and he starts to fear for what's going to happen to his family after his death, he starts to get a bit more ruthless and cutthroat. And this was a side I didn't really see of Cosimo in Masters of Florence, and I didn't really see in Medici, the Magnificent Part 1. And I'm really glad they showed it, because the thing we have to remember is these men were absolutely ruthless. Everyone was at that time, all of the nobility, anyone in power. You never get into a position of power at that time without being completely cutthroat. They would order somebody assassinated like that. So I was very happy to see the light and dark and the contrast in Lorenzo's power, because that made it more believable, and it didn't make him an any less lovable protagonist, in my opinion. I mean, of course you're going to have Cosimo, you know, he's the hero of our story. You don't want to see him doing bad things, and when he's portrayed as doing bad things, it's because he absolutely has to, and he has no choice. But really, it wasn't like that at all. Everyone was stabbing everyone else in the back. When I was doing research, I was like, surely this many people can't have been assassinated. They were, mostly. Yeah, it's just a bit thing. I think a lot of good storylines were missed. There was a potential for a lot more in this series to be explored, and a lot was made up. So they didn't need to make stuff up, because the facts, the historical facts, are exciting enough as it is. And that's what I find interesting about a series on the Borgias as well. Like, there's enough juicy stuff going on there that you don't need to give credence to the rumours of an incestuous relationship between Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia. It's just... But anyway, I digress. But yeah, in short, the timeline's all over the shop, but I absolutely loved the ending, and I really enjoyed the series, and I'm kind of sad that this is the end of it. So let me know what you thought in the comments below. Please let me know which series, book, film, whatever you would like this historian to react to next. Definitely subscribe, give us a thumbs up, all that kind of thing. And I will see you again for another episode of A Historian Reacts or Herstory. Take care, guys, and look after yourselves in these very worrying and bizarre times. But lockdown can be a blessing if you make it that way. We have a lot more time to read books and to watch history things, and we have more time for history now. So yes, take care. Love you lots. Goodbye, Herstory.